Okay, ATL class, welcome. This is Dr. Dippold, and today's lesson is on self-regulation learning. So what is learning all about? So first we're going to define the word SRL, or self-regulation learning. SRL, in the word itself, has self, meaning me or you. You may have heard that term as like self-concept, self-image, talking about how you feel about yourself, self-esteem. In this case, we're talking about how you regulate or control your own learning. So a definition, please write this down, is a student managing his or her own learning. You have a lot of power in your ability to regulate or to control what you learn and how you learn it. All right, so on slide 2, J.F. Kennedy once said, efforts and courage are not enough without purpose and direction. Take 30 seconds right now to write down what this means to you. Okay. And then continuing with self-regulation learning, what it is and what it is not. So we talked about how it's managing your own learning, but it's about creating goals that help you focus your energy and time, checking in on your work, and self-evaluating your work to make sure you're doing the best work possible. What it is not is no specific direction or not checking to make sure you're meeting requirements. Okay, flip the page. You use examples of think about learning all the time. So examples of self-regulation learning could include studying, sports, everyday schoolwork, musical performance, long-term projects. Remember, we always talked about this idea of always self-improvement. I'm going to use an example of sports right now. In a soccer game, before you start the game, you may be thinking about what do I need to make sure I do this game? What do I need to, if I know the team's really good at passing, what do I need to do to stop that? Okay. Halftime is a good time when your coach and your team sits down and monitors how you guys are doing. What's working well, what isn't, and making changes. And at the end of the game, you guys kind of debrief and self-evaluate your work. So that's just an example of self-regulation learning that you use every day. Take 30 seconds right now. What is something you want to improve on this year? And write down your answer. All right, so we're going to look at a phase about self-regulation learning. There's 3 phases. The forethought phase, meaning what you do before the learning to make sure you have an environment that's conducive or helpful for learning. What you do during the learning to help you concentrate and focus. And then how do you reflect on your learning and that it informs or helps you in your future learning. So the first part is forethought. And we've talked a little bit about this in an earlier lesson related to growth mindset. Forethought is before the actual performance or task, it sort of sets the stage of learning. Prefix for means before. So we're looking at your beliefs, thinking about planning out something. So for example, when you're writing an essay, you have a graphic organizer, or you're creating an outline or thinking through before you start typing. Examples of belief would be growth mindset. We talked about in a previous lesson, ingredients to grow with a growth mindset are effort. So it's important to put in effort in order to get the goal you want or achieve or improve on something. To look at challenges as opportunities, not as something that it's a burden or can't do. Looking at mistakes as opportunities to learn rather than setbacks. And then looking at feedback on how can I improve. Take 30 seconds right now and think about the other part of forethought. How do you plan? So how do you plan, whether it's sports, music, or school? How do you plan to write an essay? How do you plan when you're studying? Thinking about how you plan before you do a task. Okay. The next page is all about, actually we're going to go to this page. So under forethought, one way of thinking about forethought or planning is creating a SMART goal. SMART stands for specific, so a specific task, something measurable, something that you can actually tangibly observe whether you did it or not, something attainable, something that you know you can do, but you also want to make it realistic and then have a time frame on it. So that's an example. We'll read an article on SMART goals a little later on, but that's just a preview. Other ways to plan are to use calendars to list goals that lead to larger goal or to list tasks that you need to do, strategic planners, or things like graphic organizers or outlines. An example of an outline, again, this is an older student, but this is an example of an outline, organizing your thoughts into concrete notes. You can do this for any of your classes, and it helps you organize your thinking. An example of a graphic organizer, and I know your teachers use this, but you can also use it to help you as well, is having the main idea and then having supporting ideas before you write a paper or think of a project. These are all great things to do to make sure that you're on the right track, whether you're completing a documentary, a paper, or other project as well. Now going back to performance, okay, we're going to look at the PowerPoint slide again. Performance is working on completing a task by using strategies to monitor and concentrate on completing the task, knowing what you are doing and not doing, okay? So I love this quote from former Redskins quarterback, RG3. He's now with the Ravens. Great things only come with great effort, okay? So again, you have to put in the effort in order to be able to do this. There are two parts to the performance phase, self-control and self-recording. So some examples of self-recording would include this idea of self-monitoring, creating a checklist. So when I'm completing something, check plus means I know it well, like if we're looking at vocabulary. Check means I somewhat know it. Check minus means I don't know it. You could also currently monitor your progress on a project. So I pulled a 6th grade example, so you can sort of rate throughout the project where you fall currently based on the rubric. So right now, if I am under 5-6, I use considerable relevant vocabulary, often accurately relate to innovations and revolutions. I could check off there, and then think about what I need to do in order to improve my grade. You could also use your agenda or calendar to monitor progress or to create your own checklist. Some other strategies also include things like self-control, the second part of the performance phase. Self-control would be like task strategies to help you focus your attention on important ideas. We've talked about this in class as well. You can underline key terms. You can highlight key terms to sort of focus in your energy that these are important words or that you need to review them. You can also use self-instruction, meaning like a self-talk, thinking through problems, whether it's a math problem or a science problem or a project that you're just working on. You can also use imagery, so picturing what your final outcome is. So sometimes it's helpful when you're working on a project to think about what you envision the final being, and then stepping back and saying, what are the steps I need to do in order to do that? Often, it is difficult, adults and students, that we procrastinate. We say, we have so much time, we don't have to do this, we delay doing something. A good strategy to help you with the learning is to provide yourself treats to motivate and positively reinforce what you're doing. So for example, after 10 minutes of doing homework, maybe you could take a 5-minute break. Or maybe after 20 minutes, take a 5-minute break. Or you could get a treat, whether it's a candy or a snack or a healthy snack. Another way of looking at performance is looking at your environment, okay? I've had students in the past who said, I've worked 2 hours on an assignment, but then they're working at Starbucks or they're working at a place where they can't really concentrate. Think about your environment. What's the best learning environment for you for this task? It may be different depending on the subject. Last but not least is the self-reflection phase. We're just going to focus in on the self-reflection phase. Reflection means thinking about what you've done and what you need to still do. A good way of thinking about this is to self-evaluate. Compare your performance to an expectation. A great way to do this, again, similar to self-monitoring. Self-monitoring means you're checking in on what you're doing. Self-evaluation means sort of where you are at the end of the project. So it's always a good tool or strategy to check your work and see where you are in the rubric before you turn in the final assignment. And that concludes our lesson. What I want you to do now is think about 2 things you've learned and what questions or comments do you have about this lesson. Thank you.